The flight attendant's voice cut through the cabin like ice. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to move to economy." Every passenger in first class turned to stare at the disheveled man struggling to quiet his sobbing 4-year-old daughter. What happened next would change everyone's lives forever, especially his. If you've ever felt judged unfairly or witnessed an act of kindness that restored your faith in humanity, hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories that remind us of the power of compassion in our divided world. James Parker hadn't slept in 3 days. His suit was wrinkled, his tie askew, and dark circles shadowed his eyes as he bounced his daughter Emma on his knee, desperately trying to soothe her tears. The first-class ticket had cost him nearly a month's salary, a necessary splurge for the overnight flight to Boston where Emma's experimental treatment awaited. A treatment that might save her life. "Please," he whispered to Emma, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "Just a little longer, sweetheart. Remember what the doctor said about your special medicine in Boston?" But Emma's sobs only grew louder, drawing irritated glances from the business travelers attempting to work or sleep in the premium cabin. Flight attendant Melissa Warner approached with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sir, I've received several complaints about the noise. Our first-class passengers have paid for a quiet, comfortable experience. I'm afraid I'll need to reseat you in economy." James felt his face burn with humiliation. "I paid for these seats too," he said quietly, trying to keep his voice steady. "My daughter is sick. She has a rare form of leukemia, and we're flying to Boston Children's Hospital for a treatment trial. Please, we need to be near the front to deplane quickly. We have a medical transport waiting." Melissa's expression didn't change. "I understand, but rules are rules. I need to consider all our passengers." A distinguished older woman across the aisle lowered her magazine. Catherine Blackwell, CEO of a pharmaceutical company and frequent first-class flyer, had been watching the scene unfold. She'd initially been annoyed by the child's crying, but something about the father's desperate eyes struck her. "Excuse me," Catherine said, her authoritative voice silencing the cabin. "I'd like to speak with your supervisor immediately." 1 minute later, everything changed. The lead flight attendant arrived, expecting to mediate a routine complaint. Instead, Catherine stood and addressed both airline staff with quiet dignity. "I fly over 200,000 miles annually with your airline. I've never intervened in a situation like this, but I'm making an exception today. This man and his daughter will remain in first class. In fact, I'd like to switch seats with them so they can have more privacy in my window seat." The lead attendant recognized Catherine immediately, a top-tier frequent flyer and corporate account holder. "Of course, Ms. Blackwell. We'll arrange that immediately." As Catherine helped James and Emma settle into her more spacious seat arrangement, she noticed the child's medical bracelet. "Boston Children's," she read. "I'm actually on the board there. Which treatment program is Emma enrolled in?" James explained Dr. Levinson's experimental immunotherapy trial, a last hope after conventional treatments had failed. Catherine's expression changed subtly. "Dr. Levinson reports to me. His funding was actually cut last week due to budget constraints." James felt the floor drop beneath him. "Cut? But we were told, they promised Emma a spot. We sold our car to afford this trip." Catherine studied the little girl, who had finally fallen asleep against her father's chest. "The trial is continuing," she said after a moment. "But with limited participants." She pulled out her phone and sent a quick email. "Emma will have her spot. I'm making sure of it right now." As the flight progressed, Catherine learned James's story. A widower since Emma was an infant, he'd been fighting her illness alone for 2 years while working full-time as a high school science teacher. The medical bills had bankrupted him, but he'd never stopped searching for treatments that might save his daughter. Melissa, the flight attendant who had initially tried to remove them, returned with a blanket and a shamefaced expression. "I'm so sorry about earlier," she whispered. "I didn't understand the situation." "It's okay," James said. "You were just doing your job." But Melissa shook her head. No, I was being rigid when I should have been compassionate. I have a daughter too. She slipped him her card. My sister works at Boston Children's Inpatient Services. Call her when you arrive, she'll help make sure Emma gets settled comfortably. By the time the plane landed in Boston, news of Emma's story had spread throughout the cabin. Passengers who had initially glared at the noisy child now offered business cards, contacts at the hospital, and promises of support. One man, a real estate developer, offered James the use of his Boston apartment during Emma's treatment, rent-free. Catherine walked with them to the terminal where the medical transport waited. I'll be checking in on Emma's progress, she promised. And I've arranged for a stipend from the hospital's family support fund to cover your living expenses while you're here. James, overwhelmed, could barely speak. Why would you do all this for strangers? Catherine's professional demeanor softened. 20 years ago, I was you, a single parent with a sick child and nowhere to turn. Someone helped me when I needed it most. I promised myself I'd pay it forward if I ever had the chance. She squeezed his hand. Sometimes the universe puts us exactly where we need to be, even when it seems like the wrong place at the wrong time. 6 months later, James and Emma boarded another flight to Boston, this time for Emma's final checkup. Her cancer was in remission. The experimental treatment had worked. They were seated in economy, but as they settled in, Melissa, now a familiar face and friend, appeared at their row. We've had a seat upgrade request for you too, she said with a smile, leading them to first class where Catherine waited. I thought we could celebrate together, Catherine said, hugging Emma, who was now vibrant and energetic, her hair beginning to grow back in soft curls. I have news. The treatment that saved Emma has been approved for wider use. It will help hundreds of children like her. James looked around at the first-class cabin, the same one where he'd faced humiliation and then extraordinary kindness 6 months earlier. It's amazing how life can change in just a minute, he said. It's not about where you sit, Catherine replied. It's about who stands beside you when you need them most. That night, Emma slept peacefully in their hotel room while James updated the online journal he'd been keeping about their journey. What had started as a private diary had somehow gained thousands of followers, other parents of sick children, medical professionals, and ordinary people moved by their story. His post about that pivotal flight had gone viral months ago, prompting an outpouring of similar stories about moments when strangers had stepped in during someone's darkest hour. The airline had even changed its policy on accommodating families with medical needs, citing Emma's story as the catalyst. James thought about how close he'd come to losing everything, his daughter, his hope, his faith in humanity. And how one person's decision to speak up had triggered a cascade of kindness that ultimately saved Emma's life. The next morning, they visited the hospital for Emma's checkup. Dr. Levinson confirmed what they'd hoped, Emma remained cancer-free. As they walked through the pediatric ward, James noticed a new wing under construction. A sign announced, the Emma Parker Pediatric Immunotherapy Center. Catherine appeared beside them. Surprise, she said. Your story inspired our donors. This center will provide the treatment that saved Emma to any child who needs it, regardless of their family's financial situation. James was speechless. Emma tugged at Catherine's hand. Does this mean other kids won't have to be sick like me? That's exactly what it means, Catherine said, kneeling to the child's level. And it's all because your daddy never gave up on you, even when things seemed impossible. On their flight home, James reflected on how a moment of public humiliation had transformed into the miracle that saved his daughter. He'd learned that sometimes help comes from unexpected places, and that a single act of courage, like Catherine standing up for strangers, can set in motion changes that affect countless lives. Emma, healthy and animated, chatted with the flight attendants who now knew her by name. The passengers around them smiled at her energy, unaware they were witnessing a walking miracle. As the plane took off, James looked out at the receding city where their journey had taken such an unexpected turn. He thought about all the people who had become part of their story, Catherine, Melissa, Dr. Levinson, and countless others who had reached out after learning about Emma. He realized that the most valuable lesson wasn't just about receiving help when you need it most. It was about how that help transforms you into someone who looks for opportunities to do the same for others. James had already started a support group for parents of children with rare cancers, and was working with Catherine to ensure other families wouldn't have to sell their possessions to afford life-saving treatments. The flight attendant who had once asked him to leave first class now volunteered with his organization, helping arrange travel for families needing specialized medical care. The airline had featured their story in their corporate training about compassionate customer service. Emma fell asleep against his shoulder, her breathing deep and even, the peaceful sleep of a healthy child. James kissed her forehead, marveling at how their worst day had become the beginning of their best chapter. Sometimes life's most difficult moments are doorways to unexpected blessings. Sometimes being at your breaking point puts you directly in the path of the person who will help you rebuild. And sometimes, all it takes is 1 minute, one decision, one voice, one act of kindness, to change everything. If this story touched your heart, remember that you could be someone's Catherine today. You might never know when your willingness to speak up or extend kindness might be the minute that changes everything for someone in their darkest hour. Like, subscribe, and share this video to remind others of the difference one person can make. Because in a world that can sometimes feel cold and indifferent, we are each other's best hope. And that's a truth worth remembering.